Okay, and so at this time, I would like to turn it over to our presenter for today, Thony Martino. So, Thony, go ahead and take it over. The floor is yours.
Hey, thanks, Kim, and thanks everybody for coming on board today. My name's Thony Martino. I'm the regional director with the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Job Corps. You may be familiar with our program. You may not be familiar with our program, but what I will share with you is that over the last couple of years, Job Corps has made a deliberate attempt to try to create and carve out some space within the greater workforce ecosystem. We are intentionally looking to collaborate. We are intentionally looking to partner with programs that offer complementary services that we can more intentionally provide a degree of increased services to the participants that all of us have a stake in. So today, I just want to give a little bit of an overview of what the Job Corps program is, and happy to, Kim, at the end of this, answer any questions that might pop up. So the Job Corps program is the nation's largest residential youth employment training program that's administered by the Department of Labor. Our areas of emphasis are in career technical training, employability training, as well as academic training to young people between the ages of 16 and 24. Our program was initiated back in 1964 during the LBJ era and stands as one of the programs in the War on Poverty that's been around since that time. At any given time, Job Corps nationwide has the capacity to serve over 30,000 young people at 123 Job Corps centers that exist in all 50 states. The tenure of a Job Corps student can run anywhere between 2 to 3 years. Our basic training programs extend up to 2 years. Of course, in the if there is an accommodation that needs to occur, or in the case of our advanced training programs, it can extend to 3 years. Here's a little map that just kind of gives the scope and maybe geographical area that our program lives in. I am located out here in Dallas, Texas. The territory that I'm responsible for is in that light green. And yes, I'm certainly envious of those of you that work out there in that kind of dark blue area that have such fine locations as Hawaii, Alaska, and California. But for my territory, we're pretty rural and pretty large in terms of geographical space. But you see here that if just about anywhere in the country, there's a Job Corps center somewhere in the vicinity to you. So what are the types of young people that we serve? Well, if we were to just average the individuals who are attending our program, what you'll see is that typically it's a young person that's dropped out of high school and is in need of a high school diploma or high school equivalency. Typically, our Job Corps students are attempting to get their first full-time job. They may have had some form of employment in the past, but full-time employment, particularly full-time skilled employment, is something that they've not yet mastered. And our average age is about 18 years old. Everybody talks about wraparound services these days. It is certainly one of the hottest phrases that I continue to hear, but everybody's got a little bit of a different definition of what that means. So I'll try to concisely tell you what Job Corps' kind of wraparound services entail. The starting point for us, our bread and butter, is our job training and education programs. I'll get into our occupational, our industry sectors here in just a minute, but job training, and then of course, residential living. Almost all of our Job Corps centers, out of the 123 Job Corps centers around the country, 120 of them are residential programs, meaning that young people live in dormitory style accommodations at our Job Corps centers while they continue their education with us. Basic healthcare services are part of the delivery model. Every Job Corps center has a physician, a mental health consultant, a dentist, an optometrist, a drug and alcohol counselor, all on staff to help support the students' needs. The way we see it is that a young person really can't engage the workforce until they've had a degree of service here, and that includes dental services, right? Which I think we sometimes often overlook, but that matters too. All the meals are paid for while the student is enrolled in Job Corps, and it is cafeteria style meals. So, it's not the fancy steakhouses or anything like that, but it's certainly good, nutritious food. In some cases, we have the opportunity to earn college credits through articulation agreements that are established by local Job Corps centers and oftentimes community colleges. Career counseling, mentoring services are all part of this, as well as what you would expect in job search assistance and IT service. One of the things that's often overlooked, and as you can imagine, when you have hundreds of 16 to 24-year-old young people living on campus, recreation program is super important. Our young people are asked to work hard every day during the training day, and in the evening times, while we do offer tutoring and after-school training, it's important that young people need to learn what it is to get involved in healthy recreational programs. And so you may see our Job Corps centers involved in leagues, sports leagues around the country, involved in the YMCA and other outlets to give them a positive recreational idea of what that looks like. We have 11 in-demand industry sectors, and so this is just sort of pivoting from what I was mentioning earlier. These 11 in-demand industry sectors are built and renewed every 2 years based on emerging labor market information. And so under each of these industry sectors is a plethora of different training programs. And so a quick example of what that would mean is that when I say here under the construction industry, what does that mean? That means that students are trained in a plethora of different opportunities that would include such things as HVAC maintenance and repair, that would include such things as carpentry, building maintenance. Those types of areas are all under these larger industry sector headers. One of the interesting parts about some of our training programs is that the Department of Labor has entered into direct contracts with many of the unions that have been around for many years that are experts in these industries. So what do I mean by that is that if you're a young person who is taking one of our carpentry training programs, you're very likely being trained by the United Brotherhood of Carpenters, a long-standing union and expert in the field. Similarly, if you are in our glazing program or painting programs, then you're typically being trained by the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. They have direct connections through their in-house apprenticeship programming and certainly union benefits that go along with those occupations. So generally speaking, how does Job Corps work? It's broken up into 4 basic phases. The first phase includes the admissions process, just as you would expect. Young people are recruited every week from around the country and enroll in Job Corps. Job Corps does not subscribe to a system of quarters or semesters, but rather we have an open entry, open exit model. Every week, young people who apply to Job Corps are enrolled in the Job Corps program. And every week, young people who have come into the program and have completed are graduated and separate from our Job Corps centers. And so this gives us the ability to access individuals' needs a little bit more readily. So there is not normally a cohort that builds over a period of time and then enrolls after a few months. Our program is a little bit more flexible in that way. Once they get on center in the first 60 days, and this is where you see the career preparation period, this is a lot of assessing that's occurring during this time. Academic assessing, skills assessing, accommodations, physical, mental health needs, career exploration certainly is part of that. Every student has some semblance of an idea of what they want to do in terms of training before they come to a Job Corps center. And this career exploration opportunity gives them a chance for hands-on exploration to make a final determination on whether or not this is what they want to do. Once those decisions and assessments are made, they move on to the career development period, which is really where they'll spend the bulk of their time, living in the dormitories, enjoying the recreational activities, while also having opportunities for work-based learning or internships And, at a certain point before they graduate, they begin the process of ensuring all of their transitional barriers are resolved. And some of them can be pretty severe, as I'm sure you're aware. And whether that's housing or transportation, our Job Corps centers are responsible for ensuring they mitigate that to the degree possible. Once a young person graduates from our program, they enter into the career transition service phase, where Job Corps continues to follow up with them for a period of 12 months. Really intensive. I just thought I'd put this out there. For the first few weeks are kind of key here. So I mentioned some of these earlier. First 48 hours, they're getting into the dormitories. There's a welcome kit, and then a counseling intake occurs. And if you've been involved in this line of work for a while, you know that some of our most vulnerable youth come with some exceptionally challenging issues that to overcome. And so what we hope to happen during this intake assessment is that we get a good read on what they need and the things that we can do to affect them positively. Once they get beyond that point, a young person is administered a drug exam. If a young person comes into the Job Corps program and they test positive for drugs, they are immediately entered into drug and alcohol counseling for a period of approximately 45 days. At the conclusion of that 45 days, they will take a second drug screen. If the student is negative for drugs, they are allowed to remain in the program. And if they are positive for drugs, we unfortunately have to part ways for them for a period of 1 year. After 1 year, they may reapply, but they would not be able to continue at that point in time. Within the first 60 days, just a little bit more specifics here. The one I like to focus on here is the conflict resolution training. Super important. Again, kind of hearkening back to the fact that a young age group that we deal with in dormitories 24/7, 365 days a year can sometimes drum up some drama on occasion. And we like to believe that we can help mitigate that by offering some decent, positive ways to resolve those issues. Getting out of their career development period and moving into their training, here you see a variety of different opportunities. Career technical training, of course. At several of our Job Corps centers, we have advanced training programs. So an example of that would be if you're a young person in one of our auto repair programs and you want to continue your education within Job Corps into one of our advanced programs, Job Corps has established 2 major partnerships with auto employers, one with Toyota of North America and more recently with Mercedes-Benz. Both of these partnerships help young people qualify for jobs in dealerships at these 2 organizations across the country as technicians qualified to repair those types of vehicles. Our advanced career training program allows a young person to remain enrolled in Job Corps while they enter into college and continue their education, while continuing to live on center. Throughout the time that a young person is enrolled in Job Corps, career planning and career counseling is critical. Every student on a 60-day period is evaluated based upon their performance. We help to try to redirect the young person, give them tools to equip them with entering into the next stage of their lives. Obviously, giving them positive reinforcement when they are meeting or exceeding their goals and progressing through the program, and then giving a pathway for remediation if they are not. One of the things that a young person is required to do, particularly if their reading or math levels are not high, is that they're required to participate in evening weekend studies. And so, in this line of work, what we like to believe we perform is 24/7 training. And that is inclusive of, your evening hours. Very rarely in our lives have we been able to work a 9-to-5 job where we've not taken work home with us. And evening weekend studies kind of is like that, and so if you're behind, you got to get caught up, and it's one of our ways that we move into that we move to assist the student in that way. Transition readiness, which is, I'm sure, very familiar to all of you. This is where we're saying to a student, we've checked off a lot of the barriers that are impeding your ability, whether it's a driver's license, whether it's your ability to conduct job search skills, whether it's your housing issues. And hopefully we've entered into a point here where we're ready to hand off the student from a Job Corps center into the world of work, which we would call transition readiness. What are the program's goals? Well, very similar to most people's or most organizations. It's our intent to supply individuals to the workforce, apprenticeship programming, higher education, and military service. Just a few touch points here. This oftentimes is a question that we'll get is what makes a person eligible for the Job Corps program, where there's 10 eligibility criteria. A few I've expanded on here that I think are probably more relevant. Yes, you must be a U.S. citizen or deferred action status. Very rarely does an individual not meet the criteria one here. 16 to 24 is just a person must enter the program before their 25th birthday. If that happens, they enjoy the benefits of staying at the Job Corps program for the same period of time, 2 to 3 years, as anybody else. They must be of low income, and right below that you see the forms of how we would verify low income here. In terms of background check and criminal history, there's a couple things. Is that every young person who applies to the program has a background check run on them. This background check checks for disqualifying convictions. We have 3 primary disqualifying convictions, and that is if you've been convicted of murder, child abuse, or a crime involving rape or sexual assault, you are disqualified from the program. And in most cases, we're willing to work with a young person who has other background. An interesting thing about Job Corps students that you may not know is roughly 95% of Job Corps students who we have conducted background checks on, 95% of them come back with absolutely zero engagement with law enforcement, which I think surprises some people because of the clientele that we're called on to serve. So only 5% have some engagement with law enforcement, and very few have the disqualifying convictions. They have to have certain barriers to education and employment. One of the things that we focus on is, our more vulnerable populations, certainly homeless, runaway youth, foster care youth, and victims of trafficking are our target population. That's who we want. That's who we hope we can help serve. A young person has to be registered with Selective Service, must have a barrier to educational training needs, and must be able to be involved in group participation. And so this is a little bit of a gray area, right? Because there has to be some degree of assurance that this individual is not going to come to the Job Corps Center and immediately, find themselves in a situation where they're overwhelmed and can't deal with the circumstance of living with hundreds of other people. Criteria 9 for us is childcare. While some of our Job Corps centers do have childcare programs where you may come with your child to the Job Corps Center and live with them in single parent dormitories, the vast majority of our programs do not have that. But rather, childcare in this criteria is simply to say that if you do have children, that you are giving assurance that those children will be cared for by an alternate caregiver during the time of your enrollment. And then the last one here is a very simple one, is that they will provide authorization for us to check into their past health history. So how do folks connect with Job Corps? Just putting the map back up here for reference. It's pretty simple. We have a public-facing webpage here at jobcorps.gov. The big red Get Started icon or hyperlink is where you want to go. That's going to take you to a few pages here that's going to ask you a few questions. We accept interest forms, of course, for individuals who they themselves are interested in joining Job Corps, or if they know somebody, or if they're an influencer, a caseworker, a grandparent who may be interested in referring somebody, and that'll take you through a series of questions. If there are translation services necessary, we do have embedded into this the ability to flip to Spanish, to Dari and Pashto and to Ukrainian language. And then this is just to show you kind of what the form looks like. It's very simple. There's not a lot of information they need to provide. Date of birth is one of those key pieces of information. Understanding who the person is that is interested, and ultimately what happens is within 24 hours, an admissions counselor that is near you or near the applicant will be in touch to begin facilitating the process. So I did my best to motor through that. This is our general inbox. If you have questions, if you're in the Dallas region, we can answer your questions directly. If you're not in the Dallas region, we are happy to facilitate a conversation in the region that you are in. So, Kim, that for me wraps up my presentation.
Well, Thony, thank you so much for that great information. I know you had to squeeze a lot into 30 minutes, but you did a wonderful job of just giving us additional information to get to know more about Job Corps. So we do have a couple of questions that came in. So if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and read those questions to you. Allison asked the question, but I'm pretty sure you touched on this, but I'll let you just maybe if you want to expand on it. But she asked, can a Job Corps student be housed with their child or children?
Yeah, there are, don't hold me to this number. Well, I'll just say there are Job Corps centers that have single parent dormitories where both the child and the parent live together. The student goes to training at the Job Corps Center. There is a child care center that is on campus. Yes, there are centers like that. We don't have many like that, however.
Okay, thank you. And Allison hopes that answers your question. You can put, if you have a follow-up, you can definitely type that into the chat box.
Just
Tony, Diane asked, does Job Corps partner with staffing firms and other organizations that help with the next steps of career college planning and job placements?
staffing firms. The Department of Labor doesn't necessarily partner directly in that way. So while we administer this program, most of our Job Corps centers are contracted out to private industry. This public-private partnership allows a certain degree of flexibility with the private sector. So it would be, those would be relationships built at the individual or local Job Corps center level. And we're happy to put you in touch with those individuals if you'd like to, reach out more directly to them.
Thank you. And then as a follow-up to that, she also asked if the students are coming from low income families, how challenging is it for them to pursue secondary education? So what have you seen as far as your experience with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't, because of their background, I think we're led to believe that maybe there is a skills deficiency that would impede them to some degree. And certainly for some, that is true. But I would say that the vast majority of our students come to us with the capacity after a period of time with us to access, whether it's community college or advanced training programs or junior colleges. We've seen that generally speaking, the majority of our students can and do access those advanced programs.
And does Job Corps assist like with the financial aid process or to help them find those,
Yeah,
those grants and scholarships that are available?
that is part of the transition process for students if they desire that. And just financially speaking, let me just put a couple plugs out there. So while a student is enrolled in Job Corps, they are being paid, and it's a small stipend. So every 2 weeks, a Job Corps student will earn, and this is based on the time of enrollment. Every 2 weeks, a Job Corps student earns anywhere between $45 to $75 every 2 weeks. That is money for them simply to spend on their own expenses. Within the time of enrollment, Job Corps students also get a clothing allowance. That clothing allowance, particularly if you've been if you've served in the military, you understand this. That is specific for them to get work-related clothing. Clothing that will be critical for them to enter the workforce in the field that they've been trained in. But along with that, students are issued uniform and clothing that is of the training program that they're in. So if they are in the carpentry program, then they are being issued clothing that's appropriate for them to wear on the job, for example. So they'll have a set, but they will receive money in order for them to buy more on their own. And then at the end of the program, if the student completes all facets, their technical training and their academic training, they then receive a stipend of $1,200 at the time of separation.
Awesome.
The last thing that I'll say on that, because it's such an important thing and it's such a good question, is that we encourage two forms of employment while young people are enrolled with us. Work-based learning opportunities or internship opportunities are requirements for every Job Corps center. We want those opportunities to exist at employer work sites, and ideally they would be paid. We know how much everything costs these days, that the price of a used car is not what it used to be, and the cost of apartments certainly aren't as well. And so every bit helps, and work-based learning is a plausible opportunity for students to increase the money in hand at the time of separation. We also, where this opportunity exists, encourage young people to involve themselves in leisure time employment, where they, if they're located in an area that has employment opportunities in the area, whether they're a part of the training or not, that they may work in the evening time after the training day, accruing additional funds for the purpose of, moving on to the next stage in their lives.
Tony, is there any financial literacy? I know you had a list of the wraparound services. Was that part of the wraparound services, that financial literacy
It
piece?
is. It happens 3 times throughout the program. Introductory phases of financial literacy, which is so important, right? Happens in our career preparation period. It happens during the course of our career development period, and then it's reinforced again towards the end. And towards the end is probably where it starts to make the most sense for folks, because now we're talking about lease agreements, auto loans, financial aid, and stuff like that. And so, the tendency to want to get a credit card, for example, and what that means if you have a credit card is so important for a young person to understand, so that they'll bury themselves in debt and increasing annual percentage rates for late payments and things like that. So we do try to do our best there. But this is an opportunity for partnership, and I know we're at time. And these types of additional layers, we've worked with American Job Centers for this very topic, where experts at American Job Centers around the country have come to Job Corps centers to help provide reinforcement and training in such topics as financial literacy. And we hope to continue those relationships.
Awesome. Just one more question, Tony, that Dan put in. Dan Bates said, are candidates required to have a high school diploma or equivalent to begin?
No, absolutely not. The vast majority of our students do not have a high school diploma. A small population does, and I'll ballpark it somewhere between 20 to 30% of our population comes in with a high school diploma. The vast majority do not.
Okay, perfect. Diane did say that she would be interested in getting the contact person for the Delaware area. She wants to connect with them. So she would send information to this email address, right?
Correct.
To get the information. Okay, so Diane, just make sure you reach out to Tony at that email address. It doesn't look like there are any more questions in the chat box. Again, Tony, thank you so much for joining us here today. Again, everybody who was able to join us, thank you. This will be on our NAWDP YouTube channel. So if you want to share it or go back and watch it at a later time to get this information again, it will be available by the end of this week. Tony, if you don't mind, if I can share your PowerPoint with our participants,
Sure.
if that's okay, I'll email that out to you all as well. So thank you all. Happy Workforce Development Month as we wind that down. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.